Hey everyone, Temporal here, and we are going to be going over the results of the fall season of Overwatch Collegiate. And to everyone's surprise, we have a different result than expected. Redbirds were a shoo-in, they were a lock to win it all, but as you can see, Northwood is the champions, and you can pretty definitively say that they are the champions of this season of Collegiate. We have both the primary Activision Blizzard homecoming tournament, which they did in fact win. We had them win 4-1 in NECC, which would be one of the larger third-party leagues. And then in NACE, the other large third-party league for this season, they beat out Bay State. They also beat Bay State out in NECC, but they beat out Bay State 3-0 in the upper bracket in the grand finals there. They'd previously knocked them down in the upper bracket finals. So Northwood are the champions. Northwood are a very strong team that it is a huge shock, but the reason that it is a huge shock is that Redbirds are a team that have 4 OWL players on them. 4 players that have since been signed to OWL teams. They were signed to OWL teams in the middle of the season, but allowed to finish out their season on Redbirds. They had Sam, Hydran, Ultraviolet, and Reiner. So some very good names that people will recognize from Contenders. They should, at this point, recognize Redbirds from Contenders here. Iron, Lucamino, and React on that team as well. Now, the Redbirds certainly did have a unforeseen circumstance, and I'm not going to pretend that that didn't contribute to the win. It would be foolish not to. But this is a team that has 4 players that have been signed to OWL on it that did not take the win there. So what we're looking at is the Redbirds did have a couple of their players get COVID. Sam was not fielded for some reason. We don't quite know why that was. React was fielded instead, but React is their 7th man, and that is certainly a position that React plays. So what we ended up looking at here was we also had two of their players here with COVID. They were roommates, and that I'm sure did impact their play. So we understand why Redbirds played a bit worse than usual, perhaps, but they did not get the W there, and they lost to Northwood, who, if we take a look at Northwood here, a very good team. Obviously, people should recognize names. Lep, Landon, Cowman, Dynasty. These should be very recognizable names. You'll see these all over Contenders. They're certainly a good team. And they are, last year, people would have expected them to be the best team in Overwatch Collegiate, though they did not win it all last year. They lost out to Maryville. This year, they did clean up their mistakes from last year. They were able to win it. It does seem to be tradition that the team everyone expects to win it all actually gets second place. Last season, really, it was Northwood got second. This season, it was Redbirds get second. The super team seems to fumble. Maybe we've got a little bit of a pattern there. The other pattern that we seem to have in Overwatch is whatever you do, UCI is going to get themselves into the top 4. It doesn't matter if they're not the top 4 team. It doesn't matter if they're the 8th best team in the league. It doesn't matter if they're the 5th best team in the league. They're going to find their way into the top 4. And that's probably the other most exciting, interesting thing that happened here. Definitely Redbirds, a team that has won Contenders many times, both in their current format as the Redbirds this last year of Contenders, and then prior to that as American Tornado, which is sort of the, we'll say, spiritual father to their team. Those guys have won lots of Contenders, but they did not pull the win out here in Collegiate. Northwood was able to get that, so congratulations to Northwood. The other surprise here, though, would be UCI. UCI was not a Big Six team. If we look at the power rankings that we have here, these were the 6 teams. Obviously, Redbirds was a hard 1 seed, and they did not win. And then the rest of the hard expectation. This isn't exactly what the seeding was like. The seeding was based on the Swiss bracket play that was 10 rounds, but only seeded every 2 rounds. So the seeding wasn't perfect, but we had a pretty good feel, we felt, both here in the Overwatch Collegiate community. You can see some of us on the Overwatch podcast. I've linked the Overwatch Collegiate channel in down there, their stream, as well as streams for a bunch of these other matches if you want to go see them, including the NECC finals, including the NACE finals, including Redbird stream, Irvine stream, all those things. But This was sort of the hard-won team, but one of these five teams beating them could have maybe happened. Any of these teams below beating them would have just been like unfathomable. Oh my God, there's absolutely no way. And sure enough, we did see the two-team take it. But what we also see is one of the teams that was in the Big Six, and there's considered to be a pretty big gap between the Big Six and everyone else. People might argue that SCAD could make it in there, that SCAD could Dark Horse Challenge, but people would have also said there was a pretty big gap between SCAD and Irvine. So Irvine pulling it together, making a win in here, getting the 4 spot by taking down University of Texas Dallas, who we had ranked as the 6th team, who had the number or who had one of the top 4 seeds, just with how the bracket worked out here. That was a pretty darn big deal. We can see that based on how this was supposed to work, Redbirds were going to win 1 spot. What seed did Dallas actually have? Dallas had the 4 seed, Northwood had the 2 seed, which is appropriate, and then Harrisburg had the 3 seed. Really, Bay State was probably the next best team in there. It's fine though. Harrisburg was another Big 6 school. Maryville was another Big 6 school. So definitely surprising to see Irvine take that, and we should give Irvine congratulations for that. I do, however, think that this may have more to do, not more to do. Irvine absolutely had to work hard to get that, and as we can see, they didn't just get that, they pulled off a 3-0 win against Dallas. And again, that sort of proved everyone wrong. The coaches' world, the players' world, everyone would have predicted Dallas to win that. Everyone would have also said that, maybe SCAD can win their way into the 6, but there's no way Irvine can do it. And the reason we'd be looking at those 8 to do it is they were the ones that won their groups. The way that this bracket works out effectively is you have a situation where the top 32 teams broke into groups after the 300 teams played in Swiss, and then in those groups, there was 4 teams in each group, and one team got out as the winner of the group, and one team got out in second place in the group. And obviously, if you didn't win your group, you weren't likely to make it through. So Florida didn't win their group, Utah didn't win their group, Santa Cruz didn't win their group, Penn State didn't win their group, Converse didn't win their group, Northeastern didn't win their group, Boise didn't win their group, and Illinois Orange didn't win their group. So none of these teams would have been expected to be able to get terribly far. UCI, however, was sort of the softest teams of the teams to win their group, or that was the belief. But is this UCI totally just kicking butt and taking names? Maybe. Maybe that's what's going on. But we can also see, if we go over to NACE, that Texas Dallas had been on a little bit of a downspin. In Swiss play, late in Swiss play, they surprised everyone. They were in the number 2 spot for a while because they beat Northwood, who are now our eventual champions. So that happened earlier in the season. And then we see that here in NACE, they had a little bit of a hiccup. They go through here, drop a map to Northeastern, top 16 school, no big deal. Lose to Northwood. Okay, I think that's fine. I think most of us would have predicted that even though they beat Northwood earlier in the season, it was probably a situation where they beat Northwood 4 times out of 10, 3 times out of 10, something like that, not something where, hey, they win against Northwood 8 times out of 10. But so, maybe that makes sense. But then even after that loss to Northwood, we see that as they came down here, they had a little bit more trouble. Converse, another top 16 school, took them to the edge, and Dallas won out 3-2, but that's close. Converse managed to make that interesting. And then Harrisburg, who is another Big 6 school, but, this is the Dallas who beat Northwood a few weeks ago, loses to them in 3-1 fashion, and Harrisburg loses to Bay State. So we can obviously see that Dallas had fallen a bit in our estimations, and they probably struggled. They probably either got figured out, people saw something, great scouting happened, or they were just struggling a little bit with mentals. Really hard to know. I hope they do well. I really like that team over there, and I want to see them succeed. I've worked with some of those players before, and I think it's great what they're doing. In fact, we've covered on this video. We chatted with a bunch of the players when their team was, let me rephrase that, when their esports program was looking for a head coach to cover 4 different esports, that they are top 10 in the country at all of them. So, and paying not nearly enough. And they're trying to figure out how to be successful. So we sat down with them and chatted with them previously. I like this team, but ultimately it does look like they fell apart a little bit here, as well as UCI put it together and got the nice win before going down to Redbirds. So that's the most interesting stuff in Activision Blizzard Collegiate's homecoming tournament here. Northwoods are the champ. Northwoods also won NECC. Northwood also won NACE. Northwoods are our fall champions, which is interesting. not the Redbirds that everyone would have expected. So let's go ahead and see how that held up to our power rankings. Let's see how destroyed our power rankings got. Now, obviously, we look at this and we've been adjusting our power rankings as we go because that's how power rankings work. And what we saw here was that Redbirds did not, in fact, win it all. So we'll give ourselves one red mark there. We're not going to give a second red mark here because obviously they then won. These guys were the 3 team. Maryville versus Harrisburg. Let's take a quick look here. As we can take a quick look, we can go through to here. We can see that we don't really have any more information about Maryville. They lost to Northwood. We don't know how they really fare against Bay State, other than perhaps looking at map records there, which I don't really like to look closely at map records, although I suppose we can do it in this situation. We see that Northwood 3-0'd Maryville, 3-1 to Bay State. It seems to hold up, but again, I don't really like to look that closely at map records. We then see Harrisburg, of course, Harrisburg, Maryville, Comets. Comets actually did worse than this. That's fine. I'm not going to knock SCAD down and be like, we put SCAD wrong and UC Irvine is better, because what we see here is Irvine did fantastic here, but Irvine didn't have to go through Maryville, Harrisburg, or SCAD to get to them. They went through Texas, Dallas, who may have been on the downturn, and then they were ultimately taken out by Redbirds. Nope. That looks good. We see the Slugs did absolutely fantastic. If we want to look at the results here, this was one heck of a match to watch. UCI versus University of Santa Cruz. A 3-2 against UCI. Perhaps that was the perfect warm-up for UCI to take down University of Texas, Dallas. But that match happened. That was very interesting. It'll probably show back up on the UCI stream at some point. Unfortunately, University of California, Irvine does take down their matches for like a month or something like that after they've happened. You can watch them live. You can maybe watch them for a couple hours after, but they do then take them down, and they've since taken down that one. I'm sure that's a they don't want to get scouted thing, which is disappointing because that was a fantastic one to watch right there. So we see that happened. Oh, let's go back to our power rankings, and then we can see Converse. We don't really have much more information on the rest of these. These all effectively lost out here. We saw these teams all lost out as they were expected to do so, as did really every team that was left here. We do see a little bit more support for Northeastern did go ahead and beat Penn State University in the Boston University Collegiate Cup that also happened this weekend. So that's perhaps a little more support that, yes, as we're trying to fill these out, it makes sense for Penn State to be in a lower tier here, whatever. But we don't really have more information. So it looks like we got 2 real things wrong here, which, hey, that's fun. That's what makes it exciting. And then let's do one final comparison of how things match up between last season and this season. Let's see, hey, how did things move around? Because this is what last season looked like. This was the top, what do we have here? This would be round of 8, round of 16, round of 32. We've got the top 32 here. We've got the top 16 here. The formats are a little different. The playoffs were effectively top 32. It went Swiss, and then it went into tiebreakers for, the 9-1 teams played each other, the 8-2 teams played each other, the 7-3 teams played each other to determine the top 32 last season, whereas this season they did group stages between Swiss and this. So a little bit different, but let's see how things filtered out. So we'll just use the ones that are in the top 16 and compare to how they did last season. How's that sound? So we look at Redbirds. And Redbirds are a new program. Redbirds existed previously. We can see that they're over here somewhere if we look. I'm pretty darn sure that Redbirds were actually top 32. Am I mistaken? Here we go. So they lost to Akron. So Redbirds, it was a completely different roster. But their school was in Overwatch, and they were a reasonable Overwatch school. They were a top 32 Overwatch school. Obviously, not much is carried over there. They've got a little bit of overlapping staff from last time, but really that is a new team that we're looking at. Still, Redbirds move up from a top 32 team to a top 2 team. Okay, that's certainly interesting. Northwood, they were expected to win it all last season. They actually choked and lost to Maryville. They had beaten Maryville multiple times previously in the season, but Maryville was able to prep, able to do it, and they were able to get their win there. And hey, that worked pretty darn well for them. So Maryville goes from the number 1 team down to a top 8 team. Okay, Maryville is, not doing quite as hot. I think what we'd really say is Maryville is a top 6 team in reality. I still think that holds, but the way brackets work out, that's just fine. We take one more look here at Harrisburg. Harrisburg finished out in top 4 as well, and we can see that Harrisburg in this situation, again, top 8, probably really top 6, that probably still holds. Not too much movement there. So Maryville to drop, Harrisburg playing in about the same place. Then we move out here to top 8s, and we are going to have a bit of a, not a total newcomer on the block, but SCAD lost to UNT in the round of 32 last season, and hey, that's respectable. They made playoffs, but this SCAD looks like a completely different animal. They are dangerous, the current SCAD that we have. Yes, they only made top 8 here, but then they did get eliminated by the Redbirds. So I suppose top 8 is the right round for them to go out in. That said, seeing them lose to, the number 2 team, what many people would have expected to be the number 1 team, they're looking to be in a very good place here. They've moved up meaningfully. Then we move on to Texas Dallas. They're another program that did a pretty substantial improvement. They obviously picked up Pedal. They did a good job recruiting in general, getting talent, and they were top 8 before. And unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have moved them much. They're back in top 8. Now, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, will they be a top 6 team again? Probably. Will Irvine be back on the outside of the top 6 and probably back as the number 8 team? Probably. But ultimately, when it came down to it, when it came to crunch time, Irvine got the win done and Irvine got into the top 4. And the thing about Irvine is they've done that before. We take a look at Irvine here, and they were in the top 4 here, and that's pretty meaningful because, hey, they were in the top 4, and now in this previous season, there were 3 big teams, 1, 2, 3. These were sort of the 3 teams that everyone would have considered to be something. So someone was always going to come in as team number 4, but that could have been Bellevue that season. That could have been Irvine. That could have been Utah. These would have been the likely teams to do it. And they said, no, it's going to be us. Even Redhawks actually made a moderately decent play for that last season. So like, this was, hey, something real, something solid that they had to fight, and they did find their way through. And once again, they're sort of showing that thoroughbred champion spirit and doing it again, finding a way through, even if it took some luck to perhaps catch a University of Texas Dallas that was slumping a bit. And let's do one final look here. Oh, I want my smaller bracket to work from. We talked through Redbirds, SCAD, Irvine, Dallas, Harrisburg, Bay State. Bay State is new on the scene. Bay State is new on the scene. They built up this year very similar to how Northwood showed up new on the scene last year, and they probably showed up at a similar power level to Northwood. Now you might be saying, no, they did not show up at a similar power level. Northwood keeps beating them. But keep in mind, like, they keep making it through. They keep making it through to lose to Northwood. You send them down to the lower bracket, they beat up on Harrisburg, who beats up on Dallas. You send them through to NACE, well, they get through to the upper bracket finals, lose, then make it back to the upper bracket finals again, and get to go against them. So that's what they are. Bay State is there. They're new on the scene this season, and they did a fantastic job. They showed if you want to put some money into Overwatch as a school and try to make your name on the map like that, you can do a reasonably good job. Now, it's going to be tough when there's now 6 good, strong players in here, but they're one of those players, and they established pretty decently there. We've covered Maryville and Northwood. Now we move through to Florida. Florida continues to stay strong. Florida surprised everyone last year by just sort of showing up. Florida here showed up. They made the round of 16. They were on no one's radar. They weren't, getting no one really knew about them. No one was predicting them last year to do much of anything, and they showed up. They made it. They did well. And then even this year, they'd have been considered a bit of a weaker team. They were definitely on the lower end of our power rankings. They kept surprising us by making it to the next round. They were certainly not in our top 16 in our first couple power rankings, but our power rankings narrowed to 16 as we got down to 16 schools. And you can see they were at the very bottom of it. And that's because they surprised people last year and they surprised people again this year. You look at them and it's like, oh, that's maybe like a 4,200 team, something like that. And they go, we're not going to play like it. We're going to play a lot better than that. And they made it through to top 16 last year. They made it through to top 16 this year. They basically didn't have a meaningful program prior to that. So, nice job dark horsing it for them. Obviously, not dark forcing it to the finish, but dark forcing. We talked through SCAD. Utah got a tough draw this time. They obviously had to go up against SCAD here. That was always going to be a tough one for them, as SCAD was simply good. Utah, if we look back to the previous season, had Maryville. That is even tougher than SCAD there, most likely, and that caused them to go out in the round of 8 versus the round of 16. So they fell around here. That's that's not amazing for them, but that's what is going to happen. They're probably not going to taste a championship again. I think the scene has gotten too challenging, and they're probably not there anymore. Irvine has managed to hold on, managed to weave stuff. They don't seem like a championship caliber team, but they've at least managed to keep going deep, whereas we see Utah, who have actually won before, earlier in previous iterations of Overwatch, back when we only had two good teams. Two big team. So at that time, it would have been Harrisburg and Maryville would have been the two teams in seasons prior to this. I'm not going to go too far back in history, but we've sort of added monster teams one or two at a time each season, and it's been great as we've watched the scene level up here. So Utah gonna have to retool and level up if they want to return to making deeper runs there, or even trying to win it. UC Santa Cruz, still a club team. They do absolutely fantastic for a club team without varsity support from their school, as best I know anyways. If that's wrong, I'm sure one of them will be in chat correcting me, or they'll DM me, because they certainly know how to reach out to me. And they did fantastic. Here they got to compete. They didn't get to compete last year. Their program was very good last year, but they didn't get to compete. They went through multiple tournaments that should have qualified them, but then got disqualified because they shouldn't have been allowed to enter the thing for not being varsity in the first place, is my understanding. There were certainly ways through this. You could go through, there were certainly club teams here in this as well, but they took some other path to try to get in rather than the standard Activision Blizzard Collegiate seeding tournament. Maybe they got eliminated in that last season, I don't remember, but they then went in through some of the other routes. They were experimenting with other routes to feed into the championship here, where instead of the top 32 spots all going from the Swiss seeding tournament, they let a couple spots in from a last chance varsity tournament that they streamed. They let like one or two spots in from winning a regional league like ESC, things like that. So there were a couple other ways in here, and I think they actually qualified for a couple of them, but didn't get in through either because not varsity or something. I'm sure they could give you more details, but they've been a powerful program for a while. It's a little surprising not to see them here last year. Good to see them here. Good to see them make a good threat and, almost take down Irvine there. Penn State, another team that people would not have expected to go far. People would not have expected that team to go far. It made the top 16. It then also went out and played in the Boston tournament that happened this last weekend, and they got second place there, so congratulations to them. And then we have one final wrap-up that we will look at here. Converse was nowhere to be seen previously. Converse not finding any Converse Valkyries in here, and they showed up in force. We see in NACE, they made a good deep run. If we look at NACE, which was again probably the biggest of the third-party leagues that happened this season. NECC would be the competitor for that, but we see Converse. Converse did not manage to win their group or managed to win their region in NACE. So they got a poor seed in NACE. You can see they have the 12 seed here. They were not one of the teams to actually win their region. And the reason that they didn't win their region is I believe they went up against Winthrop, and it was right after they'd gone against Irvine in group stages of the Activision Blizzard Collegiate tournament. So Converse got a little figured out by Irvine there. Irvine exploited their lack of a second real DPS player pretty heavily with their pharmacy play. Winthrop was happy to take the cue from Irvine, pick up the breadcrumbs, and do the same thing. But then Converse had a week to put that together to solve things before they actually played the playoffs here in NACE. And they went through. They pick up a couple nice wins before going down to Bay State 3-1, able to make Bay State bleed. It's good when you can make the top six bleed. And then they really made a statement. They 3-0'd Boise. And Boise is historically a good team. We haven't gotten to Boise in our list yet, but we'll go ahead and cover them now because it's timely. We can see that last season, Boise made it to the round of 16 here before getting taken out by Irvine. Boise, solid team. In a lot of teams' power rankings and a lot of power rankings at the beginning, they would have made top 10. They've sort of fallen as the season has gone on, but they are historically a good team. They're a very well-funded program, very respected program. They make a lot of esports stuff happen, and we can see here that they are out in round of 16 as well. So that happened, but the point of that is, hey, Converse was able to make a statement as a new school, take down this school with pretty strong legacy power. Not as strong legacy power in Overwatch as necessarily Utah or Irvine, but pretty strong legacy power. They took them out, and then they even brought it to the brink against University of Texas Dallas here. Now, that may have been University of Texas Dallas on the downspin. That might have been what put them onto the part of the downspin or led to the downspin happening here. But regardless, they did it. Converse, really new school to the scene here. Well done on their part. And then that should just lead us down to everyone else we've talked about here except Illinois Orange. And Illinois Orange, they make top 16 here. And if we look at what they did previously, I believe they were top 16 here as well. Tough time through. They 3-0'd Ontario Tech. That's solid in round of 32 there. And then they went down to Northwood, and no one can blame a school for going down to Northwood. Again, one of the lower ranked teams, but they held on to round of 16 last season. They held on to round of 16 this season. You're not seeing all that much movement. You're seeing some new schools came in here and really made a statement, and you're seeing those in the forms of, hey, schools like Redbirds, obviously, because they retooled heavily. You're seeing Bay State. They're really another, well, let's go, effectively retooled, new. I'm going to call this retooled. That would be University of Texas Dallas. We're going to call this new. And then we are going to call, there was one more, Converse here. We're going to call this a new one as well. It's possible that some of these had programs before, but they were not visible programs. They were not getting a ton of coverage there. Why do I think Redbirds couldn't win? Redbirds couldn't win. I don't think it's something where they couldn't win. We know what happened is Redbirds had a couple of their players with COVID. So they have 4 players that are OWL level players, but 2 of them had COVID. And I don't know if that was the latest variant that is generally pretty mild, or if it was a prior variant that can hit a little bit worse. 2 of them certainly did still play, and the team did still field 3 of its players who have been signed to OWL rosters. Sam did not play. Their 7th man React did as well, but React plays that position, and he's been on their roster, played in other matches for them before, certainly. So that's how that went. So they definitely had something and a bit of an Achilles heel going on there, something that was hurting them definitely. But ultimately, Northwood did beat them there, and then Northwood won the 2 other major third-party leagues this season as well. So Northwood are our champions. And people may say, oh, well, they were sick. That covers all of it. That definitely does it. And definitely, they were sick. That definitely set them back. But the gap is small enough that them being sick is enough that they don't win. And this is the same team that has been basically running over North American Contenders, which is, running over every other Contenders that isn't Korean Contenders for the last 2 years. So the gap between Collegiate and North American Contenders has gotten very small if a couple players being sick is what it takes for, the next team to be able to win. Do I think it's safe to say Northwood is the best collegiate team? I think we have to. I mean, I think if we looked at this, I think now we have to. I think if Redbirds was staying together with that same roster, I think it would be foolish to not predict them to win. Just like at the beginning of this season, even though Maryville had won the prior season by taking down Northwood, Northwood had taken Maryville down 2 or 3 times before that, and we all expected coming into this season that therefore Northwood, not Maryville, was the number 2 team, with Redbirds being the number 1 team. And I think if they kept that same Redbirds roster together, we'd have that same expectation going into the new season, but that's not what's going to happen. Redbirds, those 4 Owl players finished out their time with Redbirds this season, but I do not expect them to be back next season. I expect them to be off to go do Owl things, and that would put Northwood as the expected best team in Collegiate, yes. I think if Northwood went into Contenders, they would beat Redbirds and beat UA. Um, I mean, it's certainly possible. Here's the thing, that Redbirds isn't going to compete in Contenders again. So here's the thing, prove to me that Contenders is happening again. Like, I don't want to have the hottest take of all time here, but convince me that Contenders is happening again before either Overwatch 2 or 5v5 or some major change happens. Because I'm not convinced that we're seeing that. If you've seen news that suggests otherwise, great. But, I have my doubts for how much of that we're really going to go do and whether that's going to be funded the way that it needs to. Just look at Solaris. I mean, Northwood, like, we'll look at Northwood's roster again here, but Northwood is players that you guys are going to recognize. We can see Northwood, Dynasty, Cowman, Landon, Lep. Like, these are players that we do recognize from Contenders. Obviously, really all of these players have spent some amount of time in Contenders at one point or another, but these are Contenders players and these are good Contenders players. Now, they do most of it. They practice on their separate teams. They play on their separate teams. They could be an even better team if they spent more of their time practicing together and they entered Contenders as a team and really put time into that, but that's not how they operate. Okay, so there we go. So we see that. So again, Northwood won it all. Redbirds, who have been running over North America for the last really 2 years. Redbirds previously American Tornado. A lot of carryover between those teams. Did ultimately not win. We definitely had a sickness factor in that, but the gap is small enough between the top of North American Contenders and the top of Collegiate that that is all it takes there. Okay. So that's what we're looking at here. And then what were we looking at? Oh, and then we were going to finish out the last of the teams here that didn't jump between. They're similar. They're not totally the same. I mean, they're similar, but hey. Okay. Unless they've retooled again very recently, but that's fine. Teams are always moving around, especially in Contenders in terms of who they're fielding. Did we have any teams left? No, we covered the last of the teams. So I think that's going to do it. If you guys are enjoying the content, please do drop a like, consider subscribing. If you have any more questions, comments, things to throw up there, go ahead and let me know. Let's pull up Solaris because people are asking. Oh, that's not quite what we wanted to do, and we'll see how those rosters are. Did Solaris retool to look even more like Northwood there? There's definitely some overlap here. Season, Landon, Cowman, Nos. Okay, so they're running 4 of them. Yeah. Those guys did get closer to each other than I remember. That hasn't always been the case, but those guys did get closer to each other than I remember. Good for them. Good for them. And how did Solaris do in the most recent Contenders? 3rd place. That's predictable, behind UA and Redbirds. That sounds right. Cool. Cool. Okay. You're not talking about the future of the most recent tournament. When was our most recent one there? Mm-hmm. Let's look at Solaris to get it. And the most recent one was October there. Okay. Yeah. So that's going to do it. I'm not seeing anything else. If you guys are enjoying the content, again, drop a like, consider subscribing if you haven't. We will certainly do some more coverage in the off season here, but this is sort of the lull between seasons for Collegiate Overwatch. So this will pick back up. I know that ESC, which is one of the leagues that happens here, will be picking up late January. So we're probably about 5-6 weeks away from that. Yeah, and then we'll see other stuff as well. And then eventually Blizzard will announce another tournament similar to this homecoming tournament that will happen in the spring. So the season will pick back up. We don't know if it'll pick back up all at once or if it'll be a little more spread out with third-party leagues versus this, but this is kind of the break in the season here. I hope you all enjoy your holidays. We'll certainly do some coverage over the holidays. I know I've had one recommendation, one asked to go do a mascot power rankings for the collegiate teams. That may be what ends up happening there, as well as some other things. But look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks.